Welcome to Conversations, a podcast provided by the Center for Thriving Leaders and sponsored by Grace Theological Seminary. I'm Dr. Trent Lambert, and we are here to help leaders thrive in ministry. Let's jump into the conversation for today. Welcome to Conversations, a podcast provided by the Center for Thriving Leaders, sponsored by Grace Theological Seminary. I am Dr. Trent Lambert, and we are here to help leaders thrive in ministry. So let's jump into our conversation for today. We have a special guest with us. We have with us author Tim Elmore, and he's going to be dealing with some topics on post-pandemic and also Generation Z. Welcome to the podcast, Tim.
Thanks, Trent. Great to be with you.
Dr. Tim Elmore is founder and CEO of Growing Leaders, an Atlanta-based non-for-profit organization created to develop emerging leaders. His work grew out of the 20 years of serving alongside Dr. John Maxwell. Elmore has appeared in the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, USA Today, Psychology Today, and he's been featured on CNN's Headline News, Fox Business, Newsmax TV, and Fox and Friends to talk about leading multiple generations in the marketplace. He's written over 35 books, including Habitudes, Images That Form Leadership Habits and Attitudes, 8 Paradoxes of Great Leadership, and A New Kind of Diversity, Making the Difference Generations on Your Team a Competitive Advantage. Once again, Tim, so privileged to have you with us in the podcast room, though you're distant, but we're so glad you're here.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I love this topic, and I can hardly wait to dig in.
So the topic again today is for Generation Z Unfiltered. And Tim, our listening audience, we have probably maybe a little over 6,000 in our listening audience. And our listeners today are ministry leaders and pastoral leaders across the country. And so right now they're facing some dilemmas, as you know, in a post-pandemic world, trying to figure out what normal is, if there is such a thing anymore. And part of that is Generation Z. So as we dive in, who is Generation Z and how are they different than millennials?
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you asked that question, how they different. I think our first problem, that I spotted a number of years ago was that we kind of assumed Gen Z was just a continuation of the millennial generation with the same dilemmas, same challenges, same strengths.
So true.
And they are distinctly different. Now, there are similarities. Kids are kids, blah, blah, blah. But millennials grew up with a cell phone. Gen Z grew up with a smartphone, which has been a game changer. So when I began to see two growing realities that were way bigger for Gen Z than they were millennials, I thought, I better start helping leaders figure this out so we can connect with them and really, win them at the heart level. So here are two, Trent, real quick. I hear this all the time from employers, especially hiring Gen Z job candidates at 22 years old. They have a huge sense of agency, meaning they feel very empowered. They feel very much like, I can do this. I may be smarter than you. They may not say it that loud, but you go, whoa. Sometimes I think they think it comes across as confidence. Sometimes to an older adult, it comes across as arrogance. I have a friend who just interviewed a sharp young graduate from Pepperdine University. It's an attorney. He's an attorney. And within 15 minutes of the job interview beginning, Trent, she said to him, I'm going to have your job in 18 months. Now, I'm thinking, probably not a good thing to say at the beginning of the job interview, but I'm sure she thought that came across, I'm confident.
Yeah.
But that was very off-putting to him. So anyway, high sense of agency, whether you're interviewing them, whether you're trying to lead them in a youth group or a young adult ministry, or you're trying to hire them, just know you may see a really high sense of agency and empowerment. But the other side of the same coin, which almost seems like a paradox, is there's a high sense of anxiety. So I think you know this, Trent, we constantly hear stories of anxiety, panic attacks, depression, just mental health issues. And it's scary. It's absolutely scary. But what we cannot do as older adults is say, back in my day, we walked uphill in the snow, all that stuff we do.
So true. So true.
I tried it. It's not helpful. So
I still try it on my kids today, Tim.
Yeah. how it was back in the day.
Yeah.
So in response, if I can just be really, really honest now with your listeners, I think we're off-putting when we lead that way. I don't think we mean to be. We mean to say, hey, I had it tougher than you. You can do this. I think they think you guys don't really get me. You don't really understand my world. You don't know what it feels like to be consuming 10,000 messages a day, both in person and on a phone and portable devices. So here's my concluding thought to this opening question. The high agency and high anxiety both were deepened by smartphones. Agency, I feel like I got this. Anxiety, I feel like I don't got this. So on any given day, we need to read them before we lead them. On one moment in the day, they may need an arm around the shoulder where we're just saying, Josh, you can do this, buddy. You can do it. The other moment, we need to say, I need to take my hands off. No arm around the shoulder. You got this. Let me cheer you on, but I need to let you alone. Mm-hmm. So I'll stop there. But I feel like that's one of the biggest differences that I have seen. And I began working with students, over 4 decades ago. It's very, very different today.
Talking with ministry leaders across the country from the Center for Thriving Leaders here, I'll ask them, what are some of the greatest needs? How can I help you? And resounding what I've heard is we ourselves as ministry leaders and the people we pastor are dealing with mental health issues and anxiety.
Yeah.
I also coach youth football on the side, Tim. And what you just said about high agency and anxiety is so true. I mean, I've got some young athletes that are very self-confident. They've got this. They're going to, succeed, and they do. But also at the other end, I've got, some players with very high anxiety. So it's both ends of the spectrum. You're so right on.
Yeah. Well, quick story. So Quinn Ewers played quarterback for Texas. They made it to the CFP, great team, University of Texas. If you remember Quinn's story, he's a picture of what we're talking about. So Quinn arranged to graduate from high school a year different. So he feels very much like a free agent in high school, commits to Texas, but then gets a very sweet NIL deal at Ohio State. So he decommits from Texas, goes up to Columbus, Ohio, sits on the bench behind C.J. Stroud for a year, but with a very large sum of money. Now, remember, he's 18 at the time. He made more money at 18 than I've made at my age.
Yeah.
But he doesn't play much, so he decommits from Ohio State and returns to Texas. Great kid. Great. Yeah, great. I'm not throwing shade. I'm just saying we are in a new day. I just heard a high school senior, and he said something that it's going to be off-putting to listeners, but he wasn't trying to be disrespectful. He said to me, my teachers are obsolete. And what he meant by that was, I can look up anything they're saying in the classroom. Tell me something I don't know. Well, we're saying, oh, you don't know a lot, Buster, but they can. So they don't need us for information. They need us for interpretation. Let me help you make sense of all that you know. I realize you watch 25 YouTube videos. Now let me give context to the content. So our role is changing, and I think we dare not, fail to keep up, or they will just walk away from the church. They'll walk away from Christian schools because they just don't see us as relevant.
Tim, I think what you just said, if our listeners don't get anything else what you just said, what you just said is phenomenal, that Generation Z is not going to teachers necessarily for information, but interpretation. Yeah. I think that's absolutely phenomenal and spot on.
Yeah. Well, I've outlined a number of shifts I have to make. I'm still working with students and faculty and coaches and so forth. And I'm realizing at my age especially, that's a hard shift. I feel pretty set in my ways. I feel like I know what worked in the past, but you and I both know, Trent, what worked in the past may not work in the future. So we're backward facing. These kids are forward facing, but we need to join them. And if you don't mind, I want to jump ahead.
Please.
I think one of the great things I'm doing right now is reverse mentoring. Reverse mentoring. So I'll sit down with let's say an 18-year-old, and we swap stories. You can always find something in common when you swap stories. But then I'll sure pour into him or her stuff that I picked up, mostly timeless stuff. from Scripture, but then I switch hats. They need to pour into me some of the timely, not timeless stuff, how we could monetize TikTok, for our organization or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if we who are older can eat a little humble pie, swallow our ego, check our ego and logo at the door, and just be humans. But let each side, each young and old, contribute what they have. We may have a ministry that is absolutely unstoppable. I really, really believe that.
Tim, one of the areas of ministry for me over the years of pastoring and also in academia is I always want to, again, the message doesn't change, but I always want to be relevant to the culture I'm ministering to. And for me personally right now, Generation Z is very close to my heart. My coaching, I still have a 14-year-old son. And so I want to make sure that I'm understanding. In fact, we're doing a study here, grant-based. We're going to be working with Wheaton, actually looking at Generation Z. So all these topics I think are so relevant right now. In that, in your opinion, you've kind of touched on this a little bit. How and why did these changes happen?
Well, I've already alluded to the smartphone.
Yeah.
So portable devices are now ubiquitous. They're just everywhere. And I think we got ambushed, Trent. I know that's a strong verb, but I think we got ambushed. I don't think parents really knew what was going to happen with this little device in our hand became a computer with internet access. I think that's one of them. In fact, let me just share a thought that might make a lot of sense to your listeners and maybe will tweak their leadership. I think the generation gap widened when the screens in our life went from public to private. So here's what I mean. When I was growing up, way back in the day, we had one screen in our house. You can probably guess what it was. It was a TV. That's the only screen we had in our house.
The big piece of furniture, right?
That's right. Exactly. And the big piece was probably 14 inches big. I mean, So we all gathered around as a family and watched I Love Lucy or the Dick Van Dyke Show or Andy Griffith or whatever. We watched together. We laughed together. We talked together. We were together. Fast forward to today, decades later, we've all got our own private screen, don't we? And so I might know my 17-year-old daughter has an Instagram account. I have no idea she has 5 Finsta accounts, fake Instagram, where she has developed personas for herself. She's completely misrepresenting who she is and wanting to, and interacting with God knows who. And I'm not saying this is all horrible. We're all going to hell. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying I don't think we really realize there was a generation gap when I was a kid. There's a huge gap now, which means, here's what I think it means. Parents, youth pastors, professors, teachers, coaches like you, we've got to work harder at closing that gap than we did even 3 or 4 decades ago. So can I offer an analogy? I know I'm monopolizing this conversation. I'm so sorry.
No, please.
Here's the analogy I use. If I were to get on a jet plane and fly over to, I don't know, I'm making this up, China, I would hop off that plane in China knowing I've got to work harder to connect with people over here because they speak a different language. They have different values. They probably have different customs. Bingo. I think the work I'm willing to do in China, I've got to do when I work with a next gen, let's say kid, if I can use that word respectfully, who has different values, has different customs, speaks a different language than I do. I had to look up, some Hundo Pete. What's that mean? 100%. But all I'm saying is, I guess I'll just admit, listeners, I've got to work harder. And maybe you might need to as well. And let's not get frustrated. Let's become fascinated with this new gen who will be leading us, ready or not, in about 10, 15 years.
I think that's a great word. I am fascinated as well with this generation. And I think a key word is we have to be intentional. We have to really be intentional of how we present material, how we teach, how we pastor, how we lead with this culture.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
Tim, in your book, you talk about 9 challenges facing Generation Z and those who lead them. Could you talk about maybe 1 or 2 of those challenges? I know you mentioned a few things, but could you bring some things from your book on those 9 challenges?
Yeah. One, I won't be eloquent in this, but I do want to share a story to illustrate one of them. So one of the challenges they have that we also have as their leaders is they do have access to all of this information. So they're very empowered. They know a lot. So let's just be honest. At 16, they know more 16 than I knew at 16. Okay. But at the same time, their locus of control internally is more external. Now, let me explain that term. So Dr. Julian Rotter at Ohio State University, decades and decades and decades ago, came up with this scale that everybody learned in Psych 101, okay, back in college. He began to measure whether students, as they graduate, were graduating with an internal locus of control or an external locus of control. The difference is, if you're internal, you assume that you're responsible for your own success. In other words, if it is to me, it's up to me. If it is to be, it's up to me. You've all heard that phrase. My mom and dad taught me that. You take, responsibility for your every practice, right? Or studying for that exam. Don't blame your teacher. Don't blame your coach. Okay, we all get that. I'm sounding like an old man right now. So that's internal locus. External locus of control people, and it's not just young, it's young and old, are people that believe that external forces or fate somehow control the outcomes of their life. Now, we'd all admit it's a little of both, but what you carry into the adult world has a lot to do with your level of success. Dr. Rotter found out 9 years into his research, it's a longitudinal study. He said those with an internal locus become measurably more successful in life. Well, naturally, okay? But here's the trouble. As time has marched on into the 21st century, there's been this steep climb within kids for external locus and a decline in internal locus. And I don't think it's because they're bad kids or evil or wicked. They're great kids. They are smarter than I was. But it's so overwhelming today. And we adults have been so prescriptive in our leadership, telling them everywhere to go and what to do, SAT, this, that, and the other, that they're going, fine, Mom, you're in control of my life, not me. Well, you can imagine that's frustrating, but that's an external locus. So let me just bottom line it right now. One of the challenges is we as leaders must give them a greater sense of ownership of their life and their decisions, even if it means we let them fail a time or two or make a mistake or skin their knee, dare I say. We have been so preoccupied with safety, and that's natural for parents especially, but sometimes at the expense of them learning lessons you only get through making mistakes and failing and having consequences for those mistakes. We were asking our children to negotiate with their teachers when they didn't get an assignment. We didn't march down to the teacher and say, well, let me be the agent for my son right now. If he didn't get a science project, and we said, Jonathan, go talk to Mrs. Archer and tell her what happened and, say, I'd love to have it, all that I'm saying. So I'll stop waxing eloquent there, but that's one of the ones I think it starts with us. We need to make a change.
Tim, as you're talking, I'm just reflecting on my coaching, and what you said is so accurate. I love parental involvement. I want to see parents involved with their athlete, but sometimes to the point that the parent is too involved where the student's not having any responsibility whatsoever. And I'm seeing that play out more and more. So it's very interesting that you said that, that external piece is higher in this generation. And that is so accurate and to the point.
You must feel it. Yeah.
You feel it.
You'll love this. You'll love this trend as a coach. I saw a one-frame cartoon that said it all. It was a high school football coach with this group of, young men in front of him on a Friday night. He said, now, fellas, this is your game tonight. This is your season. This is your championship to win. Now go out and do exactly what I told you.
So true.
Right.
So true.
So anyway.
I love our dialogue of identifying what Generation Z is, who they are, the impact. As a practitioner, as a pastor, now I'm beginning to think, okay, I have this information. How do I reach them now as parents? How do I reach them as leaders? How do I reach them as an educator or a pastor? What do I do now?
Wow. That's a $64,000
It is.
question. You know that, don't you? Well, let me venture at a couple of ideas that have been helpful for me. So I'm not just sharing research and theories. It is research, but this is what I'm doing right now as I interact with Gen Z. So the first shift that I would make, I think, no, I don't think, I know, is don't think control, think connect. Don't think control, think connect. Here's what I mean by that. I don't know about you, Trent, but when something goes awry in our household or the youth group or whatever, I want to just seize control.
Certainly.
Things are going bonkers. It's chaos here. Nobody knows what. I just want to seize control. I don't know if it's a male thing. I don't know if it's.
Well, I want to fix it right now.
What. That's right. Absolutely. Yeah. Is that not an alpha male if I've ever heard one? But you and I both know control's a myth. We don't control the attitude of a teenager. I've never been able to do that. But what I can pursue is connection at the heart level. It's that proverbial arm around the shoulder where we're saying, Josh, tell me what's going on, buddy. I can tell you're not yourself. I know you're better than what just happened. Talk to me, man. And I'm telling you, even though we don't get control, we get deepened influence because we connected through relationship, not badge. And I feel like sometimes we get so frustrated, as I just said, we just get angry and frustrated, and we just want to yell at. I'm sure you get tempted to yell at a few times. So, and sometimes they need that. But I would just say, listeners, don't think control, think connect. You'll be amazed at the heart connection you'll have, and through relationship, you begin to influence their behavior and their thoughts and words, as opposed to I'm making you do this. Yeah.
Tim, do you see a change in that when it comes to authority? For example, when I was raised, if a teacher said something, you never questioned the teacher. If a coach told you to run, you just ran. You didn't ask questions. When you went to church, it was the pastor, right? You respected authority, and that's how it was.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know if we see that in this generation. I think more than just accepting authority, you have to earn their respect.
Yeah, right. I'm so glad you brought that up. This is so key for you all listening right now and pondering how does it tweak my leadership. So two things come to my mind. You're absolutely right, by the way. In fact, what you just said is research-based. So in the Generation Z Unfiltered book that you've been referring to, I have a 2-page spread of a generation chart. And I compare and contrast all kinds of categories in the different generations. So in my mom and dad's generation, what they taught me was respect authority. Mm-hmm. Even if I didn't like it, that's what I was taught. You know what? After I researched Gen Z and had focus groups with middle school, high school, college students, and young professionals, you know what I got for their view of authority? Not sure I even need you. Wow. Not sure I even need you. And I don't think, well, when they told me that, it wasn't disrespectful. They were just wondering, what's an old guy like you have to say that's relevant to me? And by the way, of course you have something to say, but just know their perception, which is their reality, they're not seeing that you understand the future as well as they do. So that would be one thing. The other item would be, I think they're not sure they need us because, again, they've got this portable device and they are quite enslaved to it. Many, not all, but many. And they'll ask Google before they'll ask Dad. Google's quick with an answer. We think it's pretty accurate. I don't have time. Dad may be wrong. He may be opinionated. So just know we are leading in a very different time than almost any time in the past. I don't know, but I would suspect that's true.
Yeah. I know we've got some parents listening as well, and they're, pastoring and leading and so on and so forth, and they've got a student who's in Generation Z, and they're trying to make a connection. Tim, we've got this generation, millennials too, and a little bit of I was never much of a gamer. Gaming just started with the brand new Atari when I was a kid.
Yes.
And are limits a good thing for this generation? You know what? For example, Tim, in my house, my son likes to play Xbox, and so I use it as a reward mechanism. Hey, if you do this, you do this, you accomplish this, you get your training in for football, so on and so forth, you can spend so much time on Xbox.
Yeah.
Do you have any recommendations for parents right now of how they could help their relationship with their Generation Z student?
Absolutely. And I don't know everything, but let me give you 2 or 3 things that I consider best practices as they get around the country. Here's what we're picking up that really has worked. Number one is what you just did, what you just articulated, making it a reward. And you're not punishing them when they can't. You're just saying, first things first, football practice, homework, academics, family time, blah, blah, blah. But here's a couple of pieces of data that might be really helpful. Dr. Gene Twenge and this is San Diego State and NYU, Jonathan Haidt, who is the leadership ethics professor there, has collated the data. And here's what they tell us. 2 hours or less on a portable device each day makes you far less vulnerable to anxiety and depression. Once you jump over 2 hours, it's very interesting. It's like a hockey stick going up. It's the vulnerability to anxiety, depression, especially in women, the females, comparison traps, FOMO. It's just horrible. So I gave our kids the 2-hour rule. I'm not saying it's evil and you'll never, ever get on a screen again. I'm just saying, in fact, I shared this data with my kids. My son immediately said, man, I'm backing off. And I thought, good for you, son. And it was his decision, not mine. Secondly, I recommend an agreement that you sign. So whether it's Xbox or whether it's a phone or whether it's a tablet, what I've recommended, and I even wrote one up and posted it as a blog, a one-page contract, for lack of a better word, that you say, I just bought this phone. I bought it. I'm going to give it to you to let you use. But here are the guidelines you can imagine. By the way, number one, this gets them used to contracts. They're going to be in contracts the rest of their life. But this is an agreement that's very friendly, that you're saying, I so want you to use this and use it well. We can stay in touch with each other, blah, blah, blah. But you put some boundaries in there that if they break them, you and they have both signed this agreement. And you can say, I'm so sorry. You didn't keep the agreement, remember? And by the way, it's hanging on your refrigerator, by the way. So anyway, I'll stop there on that one. I just feel like that's so important. And then the last thing I would say is this. My son was into video games too. I just did a match time rule. So if you play 2 hours of video games, I want you to have 2 hours face-to-face with real people out in the front yard or backyard or whatever, building your interpersonal skills, your emotional intelligence. So it's fine to have 2 hours. Just know you're going to match screen time with face-to-face time, because I wanted them not just good with eye-hand coordination. I wanted them good with people. So I'll stop there, but I feel like those have been really helpful, not only for my kids, but for all the sleep that we work with every year at Growing Leaders.
Tim, we could stop right there. We just had church. I mean, what you just said right there, I can't thank you enough for sharing that for our listeners. I'm even having takeaways here as how I'm going to engage with my son even further. Phenomenal, Tim. Thank you.
Good. Yeah, you bet.
Let's transition here just a little bit, and let's talk about hiring and retaining Generation Z team members in the workplace. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, a couple of thoughts real quick. One is it might be helpful for listeners to know that 72% of public high school students in America want to be an entrepreneur. I'll say that again. 72% of high school students in America, public high school students, want to be an entrepreneur, which says to me, I want to start something, not join something, or at least more than I want to join something. Now, they need community. We all know that. But that predisposition to want to start something screams two things. One, I'm not sure if I really trust the institutions that are around us right now. I mean, all the nationwide data trend, this, they don't really trust corporate America. They don't really trust the government. They don't really trust education. And by the way, scary, Generation Z is walking away from the church. They don't really trust that those quote unquote religious leaders are people that are trustworthy, or if they are, relevant to their life. You got to talk about substantiation. What's that mean? I don't know.
Right.
So I would say, just know with that entrepreneurial spirit, how can we establish organizations, youth groups, whatever, that give them that feel of pioneer? You get to help us start something. You get to be a part of a creative team, an innovative team, to launch something. If we'll do that, we have a much better chance at keeping them, and not just keeping, engaging them. They don't just want to sit in a youth group and talk. Well, some do, but most, I think, want to do something. So how can we be more experiential? How can we offer more experiences, not just explanations, if I can say it that way? So that would be one for sure that I think we need to switch up. The other is, because I think that when I lead Generation Z, I might have a young person that doesn't trust older folk completely, regardless of what they're saying to my face. I follow an acronym that has been so helpful for me. And I want to just share it real quick.
Mm-hmm.
Trent, you know how for years and years we've used that little phrase, this is a leg you got to stand on, which meant this is the one thing you can trust. So here's my acronym. It's A-LEG, A-L-E-G. The letter A reminds me, when I see something go awry, I need to ask, not tell. What I want to do is tell. That was stupid. What did you do that for? What the world are you thinking?
Right.
I need to start with ask. And when I say ask, I don't mean what in the world were you thinking? I mean, tell me what was behind that decision. That's really interesting. That's really different than what I would have done.
Good.
Talk to me about that. When I ask, they feel valued. And I think that's what they need from me as an older guy. The letter L, listen well. It does very little good to ask questions if we're not willing to put the work in to actually listen to them. I don't know if I do that well naturally. I've got to learn. But when I listen, think about this, they feel heard. And that's the number one cry of a Gen Z employee today is, I don't think you hear me. I don't think I've been heard, by the older generations, X and Boomer. So I think this is key. David Augsburger, a psychologist, said this, and I think it's brilliant. Check this out. Being heard is so close to feeling loved that for the average person, it's indistinguishable.
Wow.
I know. It's an expression of love. So that's the letter L. The letter E, empathize. This is also a learned skill for me. If I listen, I need to find ways verbally, non-verbally, paraverbally to communicate right back. Oh, I see, I understand, I get you. So even if it's simple things like, oh my gosh, I had no idea, or wow, I bet that made you feel horrible when that happened. It's ways that are comfortable to you, but you are communicating. Well, if we ask, they feel valued. If we listen, they feel hurt. If we empathize, they feel understood. And I think that's the need of the hour. But think about it, Trent. If someone, the other party, feels understood, now you can speak into their life. They don't need to defend themselves. They don't need to keep arguing. So the letter G is guide. Ask, listen, empathize, and guide. But I've earned my right to guide through relationship, not title. And I've won them at the heart level, hopefully. So Cam is a Gen Z team member. I love this guy. He's 40 years younger than I am, which now gives me away here. But you know what? We do reverse mentoring all the time. I'm asking him questions. I'm listening. I'm empathizing. Boy, do I have his attention. And I think he listens to me more easily. I know I'm old. I laugh and say, I know I'm old. I'm a dinosaur. But that lets him know I realize where I am in life. But maybe I have something timeless that you could use. So that's my little nutshell acronym that has thoroughly helped me connect with Gen Z better.
Phenomenal. I'm going to throw a little bit of a curveball, and please feel free to pass if you like. But now okay. I've got my churchman hat on, and okay. I am thinking about youth ministry, young adult ministry. I'm thinking about this culture, this Generation Z that we're calling it, that is so different the way that I was raised. And so speaking to ministry leaders that are dealing with young adult ministry and youth ministry right now, what does the church need to do in changing its paradigm? Because as you know, I've read the studies too, that this generation, we're losing them.
Yeah.
What can the church do in paradigmally to fix this, to get them to church?
Yeah, great question. Well, I would say number one is to understand that one of the top reasons they are leaving the church and not staying is they feel like this is the least safe place to talk about really troublesome, controversial things, like the gay issue or just LGBTQ, across the board. We all have different opinions. We all have different levels of grace. But I'm telling you, if they don't feel safe, they're not going to talk about it.
Yeah.
I feel like the church ought to be the safest place to talk about. Does it mean we're all going to agree on everything? No, it doesn't. But it ought to be the safest place. And then we're doing a leg, ask, listen, empathize, guide.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be one. We've got to be safer as a place where we're not judging, which they expect from us.
Mm-hmm.
We're not judging. Okay, so that's number. And by the way, everybody listening knows this. Jesus did this well, and he does this well. The guy that could judge really all the behavior going on with Pharisees and prostitutes, they were so, the worst of the worst were attracted to him.
Yeah.
Because they knew they'd be loved, not judged.
Yeah.
So that's number one. The second thing I would say, though, is I feel like we need to let Gen Z do more than listen to preaching and listen to Bible studies and talks. We have for decades and decades and decades. I'm a former pastor too. Mm-hmm. We just imparted. We're imparting to you. They don't like. I don't think they like that.
Well said, Tim. Well said.
Yeah. So their attention spans are really short. Last time I checked, it was 8 seconds, which doesn't mean they can't pay attention longer. My gosh, they'll binge watch something on Netflix. But it means unless I'm engaging, I got 8 seconds and then they're moving on. So what I would say is break down what you're imparting into segments where they can now give input, small group discussion, ask questions. But those even have to be safe. But that would be one. The third thing I'd say real quick to answer your question is we need to practice the big idea. This is actually Jesus' idea for how to change lives. So when I read the Gospels and I see how Jesus led his 12, but then led the masses as well, there were 4 common practices he used over and over and over again. And luckily for us, they spell the word idea. You would expect this from me, wouldn't you? Boy, here's another acronym. If you're listening and you're driving, don't take notes, but here's the idea. The letter I reminds me, he did give them instruction. So there is a place for verbal instruction, no doubt about it. Sermon on the Mount, all kinds of places, Jesus gave them instruction. How could I give them instruction, but broken up into segments that are digestible for Gen Z? But instruction alone is not enough. And if all we're doing is instructing, teaching, preaching, I just don't think that's enough. We're not going to keep it. The letter D is demonstration. So it's not tell and tell, it's show and tell. So give them places where they can see a model of what you have just preached. Mm-hmm. By the way, Trent, I know you agree with this. I'm going to just ask you, though. Wouldn't you agree it does a little good to do a sermon series on forgiveness and they watch our life and we're the most unforgiving person you'd ever met?
Amen. Absolutely.
Stupid. Yeah. And they're going to call it stupid. The 55 and older group won't, but they will. So model the way. Or minimally say, now, do you see what happened over there? That was not a good example of what we just talked about. So let's do it conversely. But I don't think that's enough. Instruction's good, demonstration's better. The letter E, experience. They need to get up off their bottoms and do something. Mm-hmm. We need to give them laboratories, not just lectures. Remember science class? It was a lecture in a lab. We need to get them labs, safe places to experiment in, whether it's evangelism or prayer or this, that, or the other. I tried, even way back 30 years ago, I was starting to do this with the students I work with. We would do it together. Then we'd talk about it. I'm telling you, this could be a game changer. The letter A is assessment. So you and I have heard forever, never, never, experience is the best teacher. It's cliche, but I actually don't believe that's true. And here's why. I've seen students have a bad experience and draw the wrong conclusion. I think experience plus assessment is the best teacher, where we actually debrief and make sense of a bad, good, or indifferent experience. So here's the funny story. I remember taking a student out and we were sharing on the campus at San Diego State University, and he was so scared to be doing any witnessing, any outreach, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And that night, I led the way. I was awful. We got no results at all. It was horrible. We got doors slammed in our face. After we were done, I said, well, let's talk about it. He goes, man, I am so encouraged. I said, you're encouraged? He said, yeah, if that happens to you, it's very cold for me. I thought, well, good for you. So we debriefed.
Glad I could help you, right?
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. So I guess I'll wrap this up here. I would just, listeners, consider, how am I doing instructing to Gen Z? How am I doing modeling or demonstration? What kind of experiences am I offering? And am I giving safe places to process and debrief? Real quick, an illustration. Jesus did these so well. Think about the times in the Gospels where Jesus huddles up with his 12 and they do not know what's going on. And he debriefs. I'll give you one quick example, but there's a bunch of them. Do you remember the time where Jesus takes 3 of his disciples, Peter, James, and John, up on the Mount of Transfiguration? The other 9, remember what they were doing? They were down the hill trying to cast a demon out with very little luck. I mean, they are trying hard. There's this poor boy with his dad, and, they're down there. I cast you out. I arrest you. I kick you out. Nothing's working, Now, I'm being silly here, but Jesus comes down, and you remember his response? How long shall I put up with you?
Yeah.
I don't think he was mad at the kid. I don't think he was mad at the dad who admitted, help my unbelief. I think he's mad at his 12 disciples. He's been training them, and they're not doing it.
Yeah.
So he comes in, solves the problem. But if remember in the Gospels, afterward they come to him and said, Lord, why couldn't we do that? And Jesus said 2 reasons. Number 1, because of your unbelief. And number 2, because this kind does not come out but by prayer and fasting. That was a debriefing session. So all I'm saying is we're just following the master. We're following the greatest leader who ever walked the earth. But isn't it interesting, Trent? He was very good with Gen Z back in his day, and they weren't even around yet.
That's so true.
We just need to go back to do what he did. So I'll stop there.
He made coaching moments, for sure.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Tim, this is going to be the hardest question we've had all day.
Okay.
As we kind of wrap up our time today, what is one takeaway that any of our listeners could apply that would help a Generation Z youth prepare for their future?
Wow. Well, okay, I'm going to share something that may be controversial. So please forgive me ahead of time, listeners, if this is not what you believe, okay? I believe that students growing up in their whole experience, not just church, but school, church, whatever, we put far too much emphasis on schools and not enough emphasis on skills. In other words, they may have very few life skills after the graduate. They've been great in the classroom, maybe got 4.0, maybe got to wear cords on their, graduation gown. But how often do we hear that? They go in to play on a team. Communication skills are low. They can't get along with a teammate. They're insecure and fragile. I'm just telling a tale you and I both heard. So I think one way we can do it is, what if we in the church not only shared scripture, of course we need to, but what if we really got them ready by teaching life skills that it's going to make them more valuable as a Christ follower in their job, in their careers, in their marriages and families? So I guess I would say we're hyper convinced that academics is the key. I'm not convinced of that. Of course, I want my kids to make good grades, but not at the expense of emotional intelligence and good listening skills. And by the way, can I say the opposite? Loving skills. So I would say, leaders listening, love these Gen Zers. Love them when you don't understand them. Ask questions first, judge later, that sort of thing. They need to be loved, and we need to teach them to love, not argue and debate. We'll get that down. But in America, I think we're so worried about being right as Christians rather than being kind as Christians. And I'm sometimes embarrassed by my brothers and sisters, and I want to apologize. So listen, we think we've got the truth. I know we've got the truth, but boy, I don't know if we're very attractive. I think we're the opposite sometimes because we haven't got the love thing down, and Gen Z is looking for that first and foremost from us.
Tim, all I can say is, wow, totally agree with you on your last statement on the piece of academics and skill.
Yeah.
Well, that is something my wife and I have shared many times with our girls and our young sons. So, wow. Listeners, you have had an incredible treat today. What an absolute blessing of time listening to Tim. Revolutionary ideas and thoughts, some simplistic in nature, but if it's so intentional, if we would begin to apply these things, how we could reach Generation Z in a totally different way. Tim, as we conclude, how can our listeners get a hold of you if they'd like more information?
Yeah. I appreciate you asking. Well, our website, let me give you two websites. Our website for growing leaders is very simple. It's quite predictable, growingleaders.com. And we have life skill curriculum, habitude, images that form leadership habits and attitudes. And that's what a lot of churches, schools are using. So growingleaders.com. But then if you're looking for a keynote speaker or whatever, wherever you are, timelmore.com is also a way to find me and a speaking team. So thank you for asking, Trent. It was really, really rich to be with you. I appreciate the well-crafted questions, and I'm hoping today was helpful at some point for those who are listening.
Amen. Also, Tim, your books, I'm sure Amazon, where else could they pick your books up?
Yeah, Amazon for sure. So if you forget everything else, go to Amazon. But growingleaders.com, we have a store there with all or almost all that I've done. So you can go there, growingleaders.com. Would be an easy way to find material.
Thank you, Tim, so much for your time today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Great to be with you, Trent.
Listeners, I've got 3 books right in front of me right now that I'm digesting from Tim, A New Kind of Diversity, Generation Z Unfiltered, and also The Pandemic Population. And it's those kind of books you just can't put down. So I encourage all of our listeners, grab the books, get yourself educated, and let's reach Generation Z. This is Dr. Trent Lambert with the Center for Thriving Leaders and Grace Theological Seminary, challenging you to keep thriving in ministry. Thanks for joining us today. God bless.
This is Dr. Trent Lambert with the Center for Thriving Leaders and Grace Theological Seminary, challenging you to keep thriving in ministry. Thanks for joining us today.